Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Thomas Lockley, and he's here today to share with us his new book, African Samurai, the true story of Yasuke, a legendary black warrior in feudal Japan. Now, Thomas is an assistant professor at Nihon University College of Law in Tokyo, where he teaches courses about international and multicultural history of Japan and East Asia. He has published several dozen research papers and articles, including the first in the world regarding the life of Yasuke. So let's welcome to the show, Thomas Lockley.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
What a pleasure it is to have you here. And I cannot wait to dive into this book with you. There are so many people talking about this book. As an author, you should be so proud.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor. I really didn't expect it. It's a bit of an interesting topic, but I didn't really expect that it would be a widely interesting topic for many, many people. So it's really great to hear that.
Well, why don't you share with our listeners the inspiration behind writing this book?
So the book is called African Samurai, and it's about an African man, a young man, maybe about 25 years old, who travels from Africa to Japan for various reasons and makes it in a very foreign country and becomes one of the leading men in that country, essentially. It is an amazing story. You couldn't actually make it up. If I tried to make a fiction book, I never would have conceived of such a story, I think. So the fact that it's actually real and did happen around 450 years ago just makes it mind-boggling. Totally phenomenal, really, in my opinion. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I wrote a book.
So was there a thread that really interested you when you heard about this topic and going, gosh, I need to learn more about this person? Is that kind of what started it?
Oh, absolutely. 10 years ago when I heard about Yasuke for the first time, I'm a historian and I'm a student of things Japanese. So I knew about Japan and I knew about a lot of the basis of the story, but he inspired me to learn more about not just general history, but everyday life, what people ate, what people did, what they looked like, how houses looked, everything you could even conceive of in the world of 450 years ago in Japan. So I got to learning about that and read a good few dozen, perhaps 100 or more books. And the result is the book that you see in front of you today, African Samurai.
Well, it's interesting because from what I understand, you're in Japan right now, right?
I'm in Tokyo right now.
Yeah. So it must have been a little bit easier to do some of the research for this book.
Yes and no. The on-the-ground research, the pacing of the battlefields or looking at where he lived and all of those kind of things, yes, of course. That was very easy. And with my co-author, Jeffrey Gerard, we did that together. I'd done it on my own before and afterwards as well, but we did the main places together, paced them out, worked out how many minutes it took to get from A to B during the battles and things like that. The research itself, a lot of it is in English. Could have been done anywhere. But with the wonders of the internet and being able to order books anywhere in the world, it didn't make any difference where I was. I could have been in Antarctica, essentially. I probably still could have done the same job for that bit. Anyway, there we go.
And that's very interesting when we look at just, we live in such a great age. Resources are available to us. But, also when you talk about being able to kind of time the distance walking from one place to another, what that would have looked like, it really makes it more real when we're walking in those footsteps.
Oh, absolutely. And until I actually walked those footsteps, I couldn't really imagine how it would have been. I don't think it's that's an author's job, isn't it, to try and convey a reality which cannot be conveyed in any other way. Unfortunately, an author can only do the second best, which is to tell those stories. The only way you can actually live it is to do what Yasuke did. Even I can't do that. I can just walk through. I can't walk through with swords in the modern day. I'd be picked up by the police. But at the same time, I think the job we did in writing African Samurai was to make the story as real as possible in the circumstances we could manage.
So, why don't you explain for our listeners who Yasuke is a little bit, so they get this idea? Where did he come from?
So Yasuke was a man from Africa. It's not entirely clear where he came from, but my research suggests that he came from what is now South Sudan. So it's in the northeast of Africa. He would have been captured as a child in a slave raid of some kind and trafficked to India. In India, he met a Jesuit called Valiano. I suspect he wasn't a slave at the time. He'd already been freed by that point. You can read about why in the book. He became the Jesuit, a missionary, essentially. He became the bodyguard of the missionary, and he went with him to Japan. When he got to Japan, he was not the first African to visit Japan, but he was the first African to visit the capital city, which was then Kyoto. And when he went there, there was a riot. The people were absolutely astonished to see a man with such dark skin. It also helped that he was around 6'2", and everybody else would have been around 5 foot at the time. So he would have been a giant. And also, the Japanese sources said he has the strength of 10 men, which means that he would have stood out pretty much anywhere. He was a very big, very strong guy. Not only that, the concept of black skin in Japan at the time was linked to divinity or to gods. The Buddha or various saints and even devils are often portrayed as black-skinned or dark-skinned in Japan, even to this day. And therefore, the people that had never seen a dark-skinned person before would have thought that there was a divine being coming down to them, essentially. And Yasuke was that being. Therefore, he was, I don't think almost like a Martian coming to see us in the modern day. I don't think we can even conceive of how amazing he would have seemed at the time. Then there was a massive riot to try and get a view of him, essentially. People died in the crowd. A building that he was in was nearly smashed to pieces. And just a few minutes away was the essential ruler of Japan, and he demanded to hear who was disturbing his peace, and he sent soldiers to break up the crowd and everything. And they brought Yasuke to this man, whose name was Nobunaga. He's one of the greatest men in Japanese history, as it happens. And Nobunaga also couldn't believe that he was dark-skinned. He thought it was a joke. He thought that the Jesuits had painted Yasuke black to as a trick, as a novelty, essentially. So he asked, this is highly impolitically correct for today, but in those days, things were a bit different. He asked Yasuke to strip to the waist, and he scrubbed Yasuke with a brush. Of course, Yasuke's skin remained the same color, and Nobunaga was so pleased he threw a party. He invited his sons, he invited his nobles. It was a massive party, and at the end of the party, Yasuke was granted a massive sum of money. And within a few days, we're not sure of the actual details, but within a few days, he becomes Nobunaga's employee. And within a month, he becomes Nobunaga's samurai. He's elevated to lordly position in Japan, essentially. He's given a sword, he's given a house, he's given servants, and he's given a stipend, an income. And he becomes, with that, the first ever person of foreign origin to be a samurai in Japan.
Well, and especially such a commanding figure as well. He really, as he's walking around, he's carrying so much with him. The locals think he's half god.
Yeah. or even the full god. They're not really sure. They don't know, and therefore he's just something of fascination for everybody that sees him at this time.
What was daily life like for him?
That's a very good question. And again, that kind of stuff unfortunately comes down to historical hypothesis. We look at what daily life was like in Japan at the time, and then we recreate it from that. We don't have any details about his personal daily life, apart from the fact that he was in high demand by his lord, Nobunaga, who often wanted to talk to him. And the rest of the time, he would probably have been standing guard as a bodyguard. Essentially, what he would have talked about would have been things that Nobunaga had never heard about before. Say, for example, war in India or war in Africa, daily life, hunting, the kind of things that warrior warlords would have been interested in 1582. And the rest of the time, he would have essentially been a warrior. By the end of the year, he's been on campaign twice, or probably been on campaign twice with Nobunaga. And during the middle of the next year, he goes on campaign again. And that is the culmination of the book.
Mm-hmm. How many different languages did he speak?
Well, that's also a matter of hypothesis, but we can guess that he was brought up in Africa, so he would have spoken at least one African language, and that would probably have been the Dinka language, Jang language from South Sudan. In India, he would almost definitely have learned the language Urdu, which is the warrior language of Western India. He would have been employed as a mercenary there. He would have learned Portuguese in service to his Jesuit. He would possibly have learned Italian because his Jesuit master was an Italian, though he spoke most of the time in Portuguese. He learned Japanese while he was in Japan. We know that because the Japanese were astonished by his language ability. So what was that, 5? Possibly 5.
Yeah.
At least, well, let's say at least 4, okay?
That's pretty impressive. I mean, you look at that and you're like, that he must have been immersed in these different languages. Very bright individual, was able to pick things up. What are some of...
sources say he was very bright. He was had a good demeanor. He was very bright, and therefore he wasn't just there to be a big guy. He also had the intelligence and the handsomeness, if you like, to make himself personable.
Sounds very, it's just an intriguing figure. What are some of the little known facts that you discovered in your research?
Well, I would have thought that from looking at from my own perspective 10 years ago, I would not have thought about Africans being in Japan in 1582 or 1581. During the research, I found out that there were at least 300 to 1,000 Africans resident in Japan over maybe a 50-year period, and probably 10 times that visiting Japan, which was interesting. Added to that, I found out about lots of other international concepts of Japan, which we don't really think about in the modern day. The trade, how the trade continued, how people are employed. Yasuke was not the only African to be employed at this time. There were many of them, and they were employed for good reasons. They were as trade advisors, as interpreters, as warriors, as messengers, as servants, all sorts of things, which is really interesting. And that led on to people of other countries as well, Korea, China, England, other places. And I found out that Japan at the time was quite diverse, especially in the West. People who had skills were in demand, just as they are today in any modern economy. If you have skills which can't be provided locally, you are worth a lot of money. Yasuke was just the peak of this. He's the one we know about most because he happened to serve the most important man in Japan. There are plenty of others who are serving lesser lords or lesser merchants who we know about a little bit. We've heard there's a name here or something there, but we don't actually have any details beyond that.
Hmm. How does the African samurai alter the understanding of African and Japanese history?
Great question, because if you'd asked me 10 years ago whether there was any African and Japanese history, I would have said, oh, I'm not sure. I've never heard about it. The fact that we have this man who is clearly exceptional and is clearly a bridge between Africa and the Far East, especially Japan, means that we can actually start to think about it in wider terms. Chapter 24 of the book goes into those terms, and we look very much at African-Japanese relations after that. But I suspect that until this book came out, very few people had even thought that there would have been many African-Japanese connections within history. So therefore, it's a start, and I hope that people start to make bridges with other countries and other cultures as well. I don't think we need to restrict this to Africa. We can extend this to India. We can extend this to the US, to Europe, anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because when you look at Yasuke, he travels between not only countries but cultures and classes as well.
Yeah, he does this quite smoothly as well. This is one of the reasons I'm really inspired by him. It's not easy to travel between cultures, as you say, and it's probably even less easy to travel between classes. And I think the most inspiring thing about when he does this is when he's in the riot in Kyoto and the building around him, the church which he's in, is being absolutely destroyed by the crowd around him. He must have been, his heart must have been pounding. He knew he was about to die, essentially. The crowd is suddenly dispersed by the soldiers. And then there must have been a massive, okay, phew, right. Mm-hmm. He's just this guy. He's just a bodyguard. He's nobody, really, at the time. Then suddenly he's put straight away into the presence of the most powerful man in Japan, one of the most powerful men in the whole of the Far East, a man who can command 100,000 soldiers. And within 5 minutes or 10 minutes that it's taken him to travel between panic, just survived, to being in the presence of this powerful man, he has managed to calm himself down, to present himself in a good demeanor, to present himself politely, and to impress this man by everything that he does. And that is the way he has gone through cultures and classes. He just has this ability somehow. If only we all had
it. My goodness, that would be a great gift to have. Let me tell you, to be able to go through those difficult situations and really come out.
Calmly,
yeah.
Collectively, it is. It's amazing.
I am just in awe of this individual. I mean, there's so much that we know and so much that we don't know. And I think your book, African Samurai, really paints a very good picture of the blending of those two.
Thank you very much. I didn't set out to write anything great. I just set out to write the story with Jeffrey about somebody who I really admire, and I think the world needs to know about. Mm-hmm. I'm really pleased if the world likes the story and does get to know more.
Well, it's interesting. People can do a little bit of research online. They can find some information on Yasuke, but not to the degree that African Samurai has. So why do you think it's important now to tell this story?
I have to be careful what I say here, but we do live in an age where it seems to me that tolerance is at a premium. And perhaps doors are closing where once they were open. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to realize the importance of admiring people for who they are rather than what they look like. I think it's important to understand the concept of cultural sharing across long distances and different cultures. And I think it's important to see the richness that we can actually derive from people like Yasuke or from people going in the other direction. And it doesn't really matter where they go or what they're doing. The way that we can derive a better world from stories like his.
And without a doubt, I mean, what an influential person he was during that time, coming from, being basically kidnapped from his family, put into different positions where eventually he becomes a samurai. There must have been some clash between some of the samurais that are there by tradition, as opposed to him coming in and being given that.
It's a great question. Unfortunately, we have no record of that at all. There would have been. You're quite right. However, Nobunaga was the Lord. He was the most powerful. He said whatever he said went, and he said Yasuke was his man, and therefore everybody else would have had to accept that. What everybody else felt in their hearts or their heads, we don't know. There would have undoubtedly been some jealousy, some envy of a stranger rising so quickly through the ranks.
And I think probably a good deal of fear as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure about fear because he didn't have any outside contacts. He had no army of his own. He had no relatives of his own. He wasn't married to have a clan of his own. He was dependent entirely upon Nobunaga. Mm. Therefore, if he lost Nobunaga's favor, as he did when Nobunaga died, obviously, essentially he's rendered nothing again. And therefore, in the age of clans, in the age of tribes, in the age of family warrior bands, essentially, I don't think he would have made much fear, apart from the fact that he was big and strong. And that would have been a very immediate fear. It wouldn't have been a longer political fear or an economic fear in a way that would have threatened other lords, for example. It might have been, oh, he might beat me up now. But, I mean, if he had done anything like that, then he wouldn't have been the man that he was. He wasn't the man to, from what we know of the sources, he wasn't the man to lose his temper, or he wasn't the man to behave stupidly, shall we say.
Yeah. I mean, your book covers so much, and it really it paints such a beautiful picture of Yasuke's life and what it was like then. What do you feel, and we've covered a lot about this, but what do you feel is the deeper meaning behind your book?
Well, I think, I mean, let's look at what he can mean for today. Again, that's covered in the last chapter. Part of the research that I did, and I am a researcher, so I approached this from a research point of view, was asking people today what Yasuke meant to them. I mean, many people are coming to Yasuke for the first time right now, but there have been an awful lot of people around that have been aware of Yasuke for many years, decades even. So what did he mean to those people? And I've used the words inspiration already in this interview, I think. But many people have said that he gives inspiration for life. He gives people a meaning to carry on. He exemplifies the fact that you can go from nothing to something very big. It's easy for me to say, but if you try hard enough, it's not quite that. You need a good dose of luck as well. But at the same time, it does happen. Slave to samurai, poverty to riches. And I think the fact that you really couldn't make this story up. It's like a Hollywood movie, except more so. Any script writer would find it very difficult to make it up. And therefore, that kind of gives an inspiration to everyday people that actually you don't have to be a Hollywood movie. This kind of stuff does happen in real life. And I know it doesn't happen very often. He's a unique being. He's a unique hero. But at the same time, even if people around the world can just feel that there is somebody like Yasuke who can show them the way, even to a small extent, I think that is quite a meaningful thing for today.
Yeah, I mean, what a just an amazing story, very well written and researched. I really appreciated African Samurai a lot. Thomas, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book and your work?
Sure. There's a Facebook page called African Samurai, funnily enough. There's a website which isn't quite complete, but it will be africansamurai.com. And I'm on various other academic sites. My university has pages with me. If people want to contact me, I'll be extremely happy to talk with them. I think the Facebook page is probably the best place.
And real quick, before we kind of go here today, you talked about movies. I can easily see this becoming a movie. Has anyone reached out to you as of yet about that?
Well, it was announced only a couple of weeks ago that the Black Panther actor Chadwick Boseman will be Yasuke in a production. Unfortunately, it's nothing to do with me. It's not connected with me, but I am very, very stoked indeed, extremely happy to think that Black Panther will now be Yasuke. I think that's a very, very good casting on Hollywood's part. I think he'll make an extremely dignified samurai warrior.
That sounds fabulous. Well, I'm sure they'll probably be reaching out to you in regards to some consulting. They should. This book is so well researched.
No comment. I wish. It's supposed to be out in 2021, I think. So you've got a couple of years yet, but it should be fun.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you very much, Marianne. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Thomas. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and, of course, to talk about your new book, African Samurai. African Samurai is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.